Namaskaram. Welcome back, humanity. Welcome back to the We Are Not Lonely podcast. Alright, it's been a while, it's been a week since we last met, and I've been doing some reading. It's actually a book that I've had in my possession for a particularly long period of time, but I never got around to reading it because sometimes I just have a bunch of books that I never get around to reading, and that's an issue that I'm trying to solve. I think the primary issue is the fact that I'm reading mostly non-physical books. Whenever I do end up reading non-physical books, I find it difficult and I always end up dropping the books halfway through. But when I do end up reading a physical book, I end up reading it all the way through. And I've spoken about this in one of the videos that I posted on YouTube. And I actually posted it and I ended up going back to reading digital books and my reading habit fell off the cliff. But suffice it to say, it's back and it's back in full force. I'm glad that it's back because I've been reading this one book. It's called India, that is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution by J. Deepak. I've spoken about him before. He's one of my primary influences. He was one of the reasons that I awakened to this true Sanatani spirit. I became a cutter Hindu thanks to listening to him talk, I guess. No, he's just, unveiled something that's been on my mind for a particularly long period of time. He vocalized it and it reverberated within my consciousness and it just felt right. And I've been taking that step forward. Now, this is part of the call to action that J. Deepak has been talking about. He wanted more fresh voices in this whole topic, in this whole debate. I mean, there's not much that hasn't been discussed, but there's a possibility that people might get tired of the same old voices. So, here I am to fill in that gaping void with my brilliant podcast with my 500,000 subscribers. I've got 58 at the moment, but I'm sure it'll be rising very soon. Anyway, I've been reading this book and I wish I had read it earlier. It's such a brilliant book. It's written very well. He's an advocate, so some of his language is a little highbrow. Not necessarily highbrow. He uses a lot of big words. I suppose that's part of his trade, to use a lot of very big words. I know an old friend, a former friend, I suppose. Now we're not really in touch anymore. She's an advocate as well, and she does the same thing. She uses a lot of big words. I suppose in their line of work, that's how it is. But by and large, the book is readable. You get the crux of the argument that he's making. And this particular book is about decoloniality. He talks about colonialism. Now, it's no surprise that India has been colonized. The argument is that India's colonization is different compared to the rest of the world because we've had two successive waves of colonization. First was by Muslim invaders, by the Khans and the Arabs and who came in, the Turks and so on and so forth. And all of that is going to be explored in great gory detail in the coming podcast episodes. But for today, we're going to be talking about the effect of the white man and his colonialism in India. Right? Now, it's not just India that has suffered from Western colonialism. Most of the world has basically been colonized by Western Europe. The effects of that colonization definitely linger to this day and are quite far-reaching, if I may say so myself, because among other things that the colonizers they imposed, among other things, the language, their lack of culture and their religion on the native population. The idea is that this great colonization project began all the way with Columbus in his voyage in the New World, to the New World, in his attempt to discover the New World in 1492. They called it the Age of Discovery because he had essentially set out to discover all of the non-Christian world. His original goal was to find India, at which he failed remarkably, and judging by the genocide that he perpetrated on the native population of America, we should be rather grateful that he was so off the mark in reaching India, because God only knows what would have happened if he had reached all the way here. Horrible things, dude. Anyway, the thing that I want to talk about is Dr. Shankar, the current External Affairs Minister, has this brilliant way of explaining Europe's mindset to the rest of the world. Now, this was highlighted during the Ukraine and Russia conflict. And this was at a time when India hadn't taken sides. They called for de-escalation. They called to bring a peaceful end to the conflict that was happening. But we basically took a non-aligned movement. We took a non-aligned stance, and that ruffled quite a few feathers around the world. And that's not what we're here to talk about, but I'm just going to quote Dr. Jaishankar or summarize him. Europe has always had this view that its problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not its problems. And the idea, the reason I brought this about is this whole Eurocentrism originated in that very age of discovery. At least that's the argument that J.S.I. Deepak makes. Now, the entire world was taken on this journey of colonization unwillingly by the European masters, and by and large, they were very successful at colonizing large swaths of the world. I mean, the very fact that I am currently speaking to you in English and not any of my native languages is adequate proof that colonization has had far-reaching effects, and the British colonial rule has had far-reaching effects that reverberate to this day. I mean, the entire fact that I am speaking to you in English right now is adequate proof that British colonization has had far-reaching effects that reverberate even to this day. I need to turn on the fucking mosquito thing because I'm being bitten by bitches. The fuck, man? So many bitches, dude. Like, I don't like it. What the fuck? Put this here. Okay. Was good. Oh, I have to go closer, huh? I think, yeah, that works. Alright. Now, it's actually gone a lot further than just the language. Most of Asia, large swaths of Asia, have been converted to primarily Christian states, Christian nations, and quite a few of them are also Islamic as a result of the colonization. Now, in this regard, India is one of the unique nations, unique civilizations, because it's one of the few civilizations that have come into contact with the marauding Abrahamic tribes, religions, and survived contact with it. Everywhere else, the native population, the native customs, the native religion has been destroyed, more or less. Now, bear in mind that India has been colonized for close to 1,000 years at this point, almost 800 odd years by Muslim invaders and 200 odd years by the British colonial masters. Now, I'm not saying that this is proof that India has not been affected at all. Like I said, the fact that I'm speaking in English is obvious proof that India too has been affected by colonization. So it's at this particular point that I have to bring in J.S.I. Deepak's book, the book that I just spoke about, India that is Bharat, and the three C's. I'm just going to refer to it as India that is Bharat, because the three C's are a little difficult to remember all of the time. Anyway, this is the first time that I've read a book and I've come across a term. This particular term that I'm talking about is called decoloniality. It's talking about reversing the effects of colonization. It's not going to be attempting to rediscover an identity that was suppressed by colonization, essentially. This is quite the interesting thing. There's a lot. I've taken a great deal of notes. Now, the thing about this book is it's brilliant. Like I said, I've been taking a great deal of notes because of how much insights there are, and I'm actually just going through the notes as I'm talking into the mic. Okay, now, Why is all of this relevant? Why did I go on a huge freaking diatribe about, not, is it a diatribe? What the hell? Is it diatribe? 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 Yeah, I did. Oh, okay. Okay, so why did I go on this diatribe against Abrahamic religions? And colonialism, primarily, that's what I've been doing. Not so much Abrahamic religions. Well, technically they're both linked, and we're going to be exploring that. And that's the point of this particular podcast, the Christian nature of colonization and all of that. And just how dehumanizing it was for the natives that had to go through that process. Now, why is this relevant? Well, the truth is, they didn't leave us with just their language. They also left us with their customs, their way of thinking. And essentially, the Indian Constitution, while it might be one of the most well-prepared, it is written in English. So we are viewing this world and we're thinking through a colonial mindset. We use the European metric to measure and judge ourselves and our development and our progress. And case in point was this one particular recent speech by the leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi. Now, he's the leader of a political party called the Congress. This is going to keep coming up because for some reason... No, it's not for some reason. This is going to keep coming up because all of these issues are political issues, and particularly recently, in recent years, the nature of conversation has steered towards the point where even our identity, our very identity as Bharatiya, has become a political issue. So this is me trying to I'm trying to find my identity through all of this discourse, right? Now, there was this one particular issue where Rahul Gandhi is the leader of the political party called the Congress. He's the latest heir in a series of dynasty politics. He's the latest heir in a line of dynasty politics going all the way back to the very first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi ji. Now, you will notice that I haven't used the usual epithets. I haven't called Nehruji by his standard title Pandit, or I haven't referred to Gandhiji by his Mahatma title. I refuse to, and I'm taking this particular reasoning from J.S. Deepak. I have adequate proof that I've been doing a great deal of reading into understanding this particular issue, and I'm not going to be disrespectful because now it's a crime, but I'm going to be talking about the issue, the Gandhian issue, as we can call it, alright? If anybody has an issue with him not being called Mahatma by me, well, it's my right. I'm not disrespecting him. In fact, I'm still giving respect. I'm just mentioning that I have an issue with what Gandhiji has done in the past, and I'm going to bring that out in the coming podcasts. And my source for all of this, they're going to be talks by Dr. Vikram Sampath. He's a historian. I'm going to be taking a lot of data from J.S. Deepak, a lot of data from Dr. Anand Ranganathan, a lot of their speeches I'll be referencing. So if you have a problem with what I'm saying, you should go after these three primary sources because that's where I'm getting all of my data. I'm doing my best to remain particularly respectful. Sarcasm over the phone, like I'm not really, you can't really understand sarcasm just through voice. You need to see it as well. But I'm not telling you to go after these three individuals. I actually look up to them, and I've gained a lot of knowledge about my country and my identity and my history by listening to them speak. I'm not actually saying go after them. I'm saying I've gotten my data points from them. So if you have a problem with my speech, you should be having problems with these three individuals as well. And they are my sources. I'm listing my sources basically. All right. Like I said, I have issues with Gandhiji as well as with Nehruji, and I'll be explaining that in the further podcasts. Now, I particularly mentioned Rahul Gandhi because of an incident that happened recently during the parliament where he called India a nation of states. He has referred to India as a union of states. He doesn't call it a nation, this particular thing is dangerous. And I'm just gonna play the clip here.
Now, this is not the first time that the Congress Member of Parliament, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, has in fact talked about India being a union of states alone, that too at a global platform. Last year as well, while speaking at Cambridge University, Rahul Gandhi had echoed similar sentiments, wherein he again compared India to Europe and said that India is a union of states. He had said in Parliament as well that India has not been described as a nation, but only as a union of states. Let's listen to what Mr. Gandhi had said then.
Bharat is a union of states. That is the line that is written in our constitution. India is not described as a nation. It is described as a union of states.
So the argument that our man is trying to make is that India is not described as a nation. It's talked about as a union of states. And I want to rip apart his argument, but I'm going to let him speak before I do that.
Meaning, the states of India, the people of India, have come together to form the union.
Now, this particular diatribe by Rahul Gandhi is particularly dangerous, especially in a country that is still very much divided. Ever since the partition, we've been divided over a bunch of issues where we seem like a united nation at the front, but there are things chipping away at our unity at a deeper level. And a lot of people had a bunch of things to say about this particular claim. There's this one person, Mr. Amit Malviya, who says, and I quote, I'm going to put this up as well, Rahul Gandhi's claim that India is not a nation but a union of states is deeply problematic and dangerous. It not just betrays his lack of understanding of our constitution, but also strikes at the core idea of independent India. It seeds the idea of India's balkanization. Now, to Mr. Rahul Gandhi's credit, he is right. Okay, in part 1 of the constitution, immediately after the preamble, the constitution begins with describing Bharat, the name and territory of the union, and so on and so forth. And you will actually notice that the name of the book, India, that is Bharat, is actually derived from this particular thing. And I'm doing my best to refer to Bharat as Bharat and refuse to use the term India, which was, again, a colonizer's word for this nation. And that's my humble plea to everybody who comes to my country and who has spent time here and who is a Bharatiya person, who is a Hindustani. Don't call yourselves Indians, call yourselves Bharatiya. Don't call this country India, call it Bharat. Alright, getting back to the constitution thing. In part 1 of the constitution, article 1, the name and territory of the union is described, and part 1, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. The states and the territories thereof shall be specified in the first schedule. 3. The territory of India shall comprise the territories of the states, the union territories specified in the first schedule, and such other territories as may be acquired. Which is really cool, which means that in the future, if we acquire any territories, that will also be part of India. Now, regarding this particular claim by Mr. Gandhi, the leader of the opposition, the prime ministerial candidate from the Congress, I just have this one thing to say, and this is something that goes all the way back to the during the time that the constitution was being drafted by the draft committee. All right. So when the draft constitution was presented, right, the drafting committee chairman, which is Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Sahib, he talked about why it was called a union of states. And this specifically, and I quote, it was used to ensure and clarify that the states did not have the right to secede from India. it was called a union of states and not a federation of states, because a federation implies that they can secede. So it's very clear the drafting committee chairman, Dr. Ambedkar, has said that this particular term, the union of states, was used to ensure and clarify that the states did not have the right to secede from India.
Now, this is the second such time that Rahul Gandhi has made such remarks. Previously, it had been fact-checked by Cambridge scholar Siddhartha Verma over his remarks saying that Bharat is a union of states. Let's listen into how the student had also confronted Mr. Rahul Gandhi last year at that forum.
You quoted Article 1 of the Constitution saying India, that is Bharat, is a union of states, as per the Constitution. But if you turn a page back and look at the preamble, it does mention that India is a nation. Bharat itself is one of the oldest surviving civilizations of the world. And the term finds its origin in the Vedas. So we have a really old civilization. So Chanakya, even Chanakya, when he interacted with the students in Takshashila, he made it clear to them that they might belong to different Mahajanpads, but ultimately they belong to a nation that is Bharat. Adi Shankaracharya, he said, 10 seconds.
1 second. Did he use the word nation?
He said, you belong to a Rashtra. Rashtra is, the Sanskrit.
Rashtra is kingdom.
Rashtra, no, it's a Sanskrit name for a nation. So
Nation,
they were.
nation is the word nation, right, is a Western concept.
So when I talk about nation, I don't just talk about a political entity, because we've had these experiments across the world. You had USSR, you had Yugoslavia, you had the experimentation with the United Arab Republic. So unless nations have a strong socio-cultural and emotional bonding and a composite culture, a constitution cannot make a nation. Nations make constitutions. My question is, don't you think as a political leader, your idea of India is not only flawed and incorrect, but also destructive because it attempts to whitewash a history of thousands of years?
No, actually, I don't think so.
Okay. You've heard the rest of the clip. You can go and make your own conclusions on the rest. You've heard the gentleman also lambast him for this particular statement. But I want to talk about how dangerous this idea that he's peddling is, right? There have been several people, several accomplished authors, better than I, way better informed than I, who have written about this particular issue. One particular person that I can remember is Dr. Rajiv Malhotra. I highly suggest checking out his works. He's written a bunch of books talking about the West and its ideas to malign India. Now, this is an actual fact. He's documented it in several books. And despite the fact that a lot of people have gone after him and called him Hinduphobic, and called him Hindutva, and he's been accused of being aligned with the BJP state, and they've called him fascist, and so on and so forth, he still continues his work. He's open for dialogue. He just destroys his opponents with facts. All right. Now, there's this one particular idea. One of his books talks about breaking India, and he calls the forces that want to break India apart the breaking India forces. And the idea is that even though India does seem to be united on the front, there are 1,000 things working internally insidiously to divide us. Right? One of this, and I'm going to touch upon this hornet's nest, is clearly a religious divide, especially between the Abrahamic religions, Islam and Christianity, particularly Islam and Hinduism, aka Sanatana Dharma. There are also issues between the north and the south of India on false racial lines, that is the Aryan versus Dravidian theory, which is particularly in force in Tamil Nadu. Now, this is a major issue in Tamil Nadu, and it's basically centered around the idea that the Tamils, the indigenous Tamils, were the original inhabitants of the north. They were originally in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, so on and so forth, and they were invaded and pushed out of the north, and they were pushed to the south by the invading Aryans. This is commonly known as the Aryan invasion theory, which was originally propagated by Max Muller, and which was also, by the way, fun fact, the basis for the core ideology of the Nazi Party, which everybody knows about, just in case you don't. Adolf Hitler, Nazi Party, World War II, memories, take it and go. Alright? So, this idea that there was a Dravidian and Aryan and the Aryans invaded, this is the core idea of the Nazi Party, and this was actually proved to be false. There was no such invasion. The idea that they wanted to portray is that Sanskrit, the Vedas, all of the great things that are Bharatiya, that are Vaidika, that are Samskriti, that come from India are not actually Indian. Again, this is the superiority complex of the European mindset in play. They want to show that everything good about India has not come from India, it has come from the West. And that's why they say the invading Aryans who were actually, and that's why even today, India, the Sanskrit language is known as the Indo-European language. Which is bullshit. It's an Indian language, dude. Just freaking accept it. But they won't, because for reasons. Because they don't want to admit that, this country is so great and all that. Anyway, the fact is, like I said, there's a bunch of organizations that want to portray that everything good that came out of India is not really Indian, and Sanskrit, the Vedas are all not Bharatiya, and they come from the West, from the superior white man. Now, Max Muller was actually commissioned by the British government, and his entire job was to portray the Vedas in a really bad light, and to portray that it's actually a corruption of the Bible. And this is basically the Christian play at work. This is their entire playbook. They go to a native land, they co-opt certain systems, they corrupt certain systems, and they use part of those rituals, and they use that as a way to convert. Max Muller's whole job was to present the Vedas as a corrupted version of the Bible, so that missionaries could proceed with the whole conversion with a lot less resistance. Because, you've been following the corrupted version, why don't you follow the original? That's the argument. That's what they wanted to do. Now, there are still organizations and certain media outlets like the print that claim that the Aryan invasion theory had happened, but now it's no longer the Aryan invasion theory. Since it's been disproved, they've started calling it the Aryan migration theory. Now, it looks like I'm trying to show evidence for an unholy nexus that wants to show that India and Bharat don't really have a civilizational basis from an indigenous standpoint. Because, how can you call yourself a civilization? How can you call yourself a nation? Y'all didn't exist. It's just been a series of migration. People have always been coming to this land. You're a melting pot of cultures, and there's no such real culture, and all of the culture that has happened is because of the mixing of cultures. And most of the Vedas are actually European in nature. So who the hell are you to tell me that y'all are Bharatiyan? That's basically the argument. And that whenever I put that tone of voice, I just want you to understand that I'm being sarcastic. Again, dude, yeah. So, the fact that Rahul Gandhi, a person who is aspiring to be the highest position in the Indian government, the Prime Minister, easily one of the most powerful positions in India, he's trying to espouse this particular idea. He's suggesting the fact that states can secede from the union that is Bharat is dangerous. It's illogical. And again, I'm reiterating the fact that it's dangerous and illogical. If he had had the foresight to study. Like I said, I found this data with a few minutes of internet searching. It came from a particular website, which I'll link. Okay, this is the Constitution, and they talk about the things that are in the Constitution. A little bit of research could have showed him that India was defined as a union and not a federation to ensure and clarify that the states did not have a right to secede from India. This was the argument of Dr. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution. All right? Now, he's aspiring to be a prime minister. He's aspiring to the highest seat in India. This is dangerous, illogical for him to make such a statement. And it's bordering on traitorous. All right? But then again, this is the agenda of the Indian National Congress and the political left. They love to suggest this idea that Bharat did not exist in any capacity as a nation or as a civilization until the great unifying project happened, which of course is of being colonized. Two waves: Islamic invaders and then the British colonization. In other words, their argument is that being colonized is what has made us a nation. This is the quality of the opposition, and people start to wonder, why are they losing so many seats, yaar? Why did they not have any freaking opposition only? They're not a very strong opposition. When you look at the quality of the leader of the opposition, you kind of understand what kind of a party the rest of the people are. When you look at the person who is being fielded, when you look at the person who is touted as the person who succeed the party to become the next prime minister, and these are the things that he says, you start to wonder, should I really be voting for this particular party? And I'm not just saying it. You can look at the poll results in 2019 for proof. And the elections are coming next year, which is why you can see a series of movies being made, like the BBC documentary about the Gujarat riots. There's a nexus outside India trying to malign the Prime Minister. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the BJP or Prime Minister Modi ji and all that, but I can give credit where it's due. And of course, I am political, and I'm not going to reveal my political affiliations. I'm not that stupid, but yeah. Anyway, so in the last episode, I spoke about how 2019 was this landmark year for Bharatiya consciousness, because of all these events that triggered debate on what it meant to be an Indian, what it meant to be a Hindu, what it meant to be Bharatiya, essentially. The concept of being a Hindu, aka Hindutva. Now, since I opened up that particular topic, I'm going to have to explain a little more. There's this issue with Hindutva. They don't have a problem with Hindu, but they have a problem with Hindutva. And a lot of people try to define the two as if they are very different. But I think J.S.I. Deepak has spoken about it the best. Hindutva is the Shatra aspect of Hindu, of being a Hindu. It is when it is peacetime, the Shatra aspect. Shatra is the warrior aspect. And it's necessary because we are no longer at peace. We're not able to follow our rituals. Our temples are under attack. They are being constantly besieged. Our identity itself is under attack. We are being told that none of the things that we want to celebrate is Hindu. There are a lot of issues being a Hindu. And at this particular time, they want to dismantle the very essence of being a Hindu. Hindutva means, in two words, the essence of being a Hindu. And as J.S.I. Deepak has spoken about multiple times, Hindutva is the Kshatriya aspect, the warrior aspect, the aspect that will fight and defend the right to be a Hindu. Globally, this is an issue, especially among the political left. There was once this event called Dismantling Hindutva. It's being... Hindus are being called intolerant, bigoted, Islamophobic, simply for wanting to practice their own beliefs and asking for equal rights with every other denomination. Now, over the years, like I've said, there's been a great polarization, especially on religious lines. And the reason for all of this is that the BJP has risen to power by appealing to the majority population, which is Hindu. They're also accused of inciting religious hatred for political gains. And I just want to say that one of the main reasons that the Congress party has fallen so sharply in popularity over the past decade or so is mostly because of its own policies, especially like minority appeasement, dynasty politics, and most importantly, severe corruption. One of the examples being the 2G spectrum case. Why is all of this important? Well, like I said, right, like recently there's been a huge question of what does it mean to be a Hindu. All of this is the present situation, the current situation. There are all of these questions being thrown around, a lot of wide-reaching statements being made about what it means to be Hindu, that there is no such thing as a Hindu. There's a certain actor called Kamal Haasan who's, while I used to respect him and used to watch his movies and all, I've decided this guy is somebody who's an entertainer. He has no logical basis. He's gone on record to claim that the Cholas were not Hindus. Now, the Cholas used to practice and worship Shiva. The customs that they used to practice were all Hindu in nature. They used to perform abhishekams and all. They used to worship Shiva. They used to worship Devi. All of these things are Hindu in nature. Now, granted, the word Hindu did not exist then. The religion of Hinduism did not exist then. The concept of that particular religion. But we've always been clear about this one particular thing called Sanatan Dharma. And if you remove the word Hindu, it doesn't matter because Sanatan Dharma has always been the way that we've described ourselves. And Sanatan Dharma has also been there in the past. Okay? Now, going on, there were a particular bunch of issues that caused me to look into this whole issue a lot more, and some of them were the abrogation/amendment of Article 367 and 370 of the Constitution, where Jammu and Kashmir the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir became two union territories of India, of Jammu, the Union Territory of Jammu and the Union Territory of Kashmir, and they were permanently added to India, essentially. There was this decision of the Supreme Court in the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi case, which affirmed the ownership of Sri Ram Lalla over his birthplace in Ayodhya. Another thing was the Citizenship Amendment Act, which basically this provided an accelerated access to citizenships for persecuted Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians from Muslim-majority countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And of course, there was also the issue of Sabrimala, which I've spoken about in the previous podcast. This came about much earlier, but there were multiple debates that kept happening because these women activists kept trying to enter the temple, and other women activists and other people refused to let them. There was an entire movement called the Ready to Wait campaign that was also launched as a result of the Supreme Court releasing all women can enter, and a bunch of women formed a huge human chain that was kilometers long saying, no, we're ready to wait, we will go in when we believe we're supposed to go in. The people will not talk about all of these particular issues. Now, and of course, there was a lot of talk about UCC, the Uniform Civil Code, being implemented. It's still on hold. It hasn't yet happened. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. It might happen when the BJP wins next year, post 2024. That's a possibility. Now, all of these issues generated tremendous debate, and they touched upon a bunch of things. Like I said, they touched upon a bunch of things that led to further polarization. It was just like this huge domino effect that kept cascading. It became this never-ending spiral that just kept expanding and expanding outward. And at the center of all of these issues, the entire identity of the Indic civilization was being questioned. We were told, like I said, in the very beginning, India was never united until our colonial masters arrived and united us. So that's why I wanted to talk about this entire issue. There's I mean, clearly there is a need for us to talk about coloniality and the effects that the British had on India, because they still have effects. There are people who still believe that the British has done great good for India, that they were the ones that united us. While this is simply not the case, the list of British caused atrocities in India are tremendous. Churchill is touted as a hero, but in my country, he's not. He's one of the most. I would describe him as he's a racist piece of shit. The amount of atrocities that he directly contributed to through his policies are innumerable. Now, Britain itself has been hated not just by most of the world that it colonized, it's also been hated by Ireland because of the potato famine. And something similar happened in India as well. But before I get to that, let me just talk about the atrocities that the British committed in India. Their occupation in India was incredibly problematic. Initially, it was the East Indian Company that had come here, and and people always assumed that the East India Company came here only because they wanted to make money. It was for economic incentive. It was for economic considerations that they arrived in India. Well, that's simply not the case. All right. There's this particularly important thing that we need to understand regarding colonizers and the whole colonization process. The entire endeavor was a mass conversion project. This has been documented. There exists this particular letter written by Pope Alexander VI. He's issued a papal bull called I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Intercetera, in 1493. This was organizing Portugal and Spain to colonize, convert, and enslaved non-Christians. The entire bull is actually in the book, and I read that, and it was eye-opening to see what kind of a view Christians, this is the Pope, all right, the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, I assume. The idea of the Pope, supposed to be a man of God, had about people who are not of the Christian faith. It was eye-opening. Now, the entire bull is available in the book, and I will try to add a link to it as well so that you can read it for yourself, but it's eye-opening, and of course, it's a very inconvenient truth, especially for Christians when they're reminded of the days of conquest, religious war, pillage, and rape. Especially the religious zeal that the white man took to converting the indigenous populations of all of the places that they had colonized. Now, to say that religious motivations did not exist for any colonization is bunkum, and proof of the pudding lies in that particular papal bull that I spoke about. This has been the idea from a very long time, all the way from 1400, and it's continued all the way down throughout history. Every single time that European nation has landed in an indigenous country. Every single time a European nation has landed in an indigenous civilization, the first thing they went about to do is destroy everything indigenous. They destroyed, they put down their worship, they put down their ancestors, they put down everything that had an indigenous quality to it, and they started installing Christianity in its place. All right. Now, to summarize with that one particular bit, to summarize the entire papal bull, the colonization of the world did not just take place for economic reasons. It also took place so that Europe could spread Christianity, their form of culture, and their mode of thought to the colonized. And this is where the superiority complex of the white man comes into play. The idea is that they were the apex of civilization, and they needed to spread the benefits of their civilization, culture, form of government, education, and religion to the savage barbarians, the uncivilized, soulless brutes that they were colonizing. The goal was essentially to turn them into white people on the inside. Now, we also have to explore another very inconvenient truth here, the attitude of the religion itself, non-Christian religions. Now, each of the Abrahamic religions are fixated on the idea that theirs is the only way to salvation. Theirs is the only one true religion in the world, and multiple wars have been fought over this one fact. Anything else, any other religion that exists in the world, is a false religion and must be purged, their followers converted or killed. This extremely violent and dangerous ideology has culminated in the Abrahamic religion of Islam, which is unforgiving and intolerant in its attitude towards non-believers, idolaters and polytheists. But we'll be talking about that a lot later. This is a known fact, but there'll be a lot of people who call me Islamophobic just for stating these facts. But like I said, this episode is not about Islam. I'll be talking about that with a great deal more research in an upcoming episode. So this is writer that J.S.I. Deepak talks about in his book, a person called Nelson Maldonado Torres, who talks about an issue with the Christian worldview. And essentially they divide the world into only three categories, which is 1, Christians, 2, infidels, 3, idolaters. Very simple worldview. Islam takes it even a little step further, like basically believers, non-believers. That is people of the book and people who don't believe in the book. More on that later. But to quote the Quran itself, idolaters and polytheists are the worst of creatures. Polytheists, that is Hindus in brackets, are the worst of creatures, and their souls will burn in the pits of hell. I'm not particularly sure about that. But basically the Quran calls polytheists, aka Hindus, the worst of creatures. Now, when Columbus was doing his colonization of North America, he realized that the Native Americans didn't particularly fall in any of these particular categories. He concluded that they had no religion, and in Christian thought, in Christian theology, the absence of a religion is sort of equated with the absence of a soul. The end result was that the white Christian was a human with a soul, whereas the dark native, who was soulless, was also considered non-human. So look at the superiority complex that comes into play at this particular point. The Christian colonizers start to believe that they're not just saving the soul of a non-Christian idolater/infidel. Since the natives don't quite have a soul, they're not actually saving their soul. Instead, by adopting Christianity, it was the first step from transforming a person from a soulless devil. No, let me do that again. So, look at the superiority complex of the Christian colonizer. They didn't just believe that they were saving the soul of a non-Christian idolater/infidel. Obviously, this is because the natives didn't have a soul, because they didn't have religion. Adopting Christianity was the first step to transforming from a person, from a soulless, devil-worshipping infidel to an actual human being. The next steps obviously were to become civilized by adopting the European lifestyle, language and mannerisms. Now, obviously, since they were doing this for the benefit of the individual, and they were not just saving him, they were actually elevating him from a soulless, demonic being to an individual with a soul, to a person who would not suffer in the pits of hell. If this person resisted this particular thought, they were put down like worse than dogs, because they were worse than dogs until they became Christian. Now, this casual disregard for the lives of the native population was rife throughout the British occupation of India. The amount of atrocities that they committed here were innumerable. There were multiple famines caused directly by British actions. I'm going to step into a slightly controversial topic, because why the hell not, right? There's this one particular clip that I'm going to be playing from Abhijit Chavda and Ranveer Alabhadia. That's from Beer Biceps. They're talking about ChatGPT, and they're talking about the difference between.
Let's just talk about GPT-4. Because we use GPT-4 at this point for content creation.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I'm sure you use it in some capacity.
I've played around with GPT 3.5. I still haven't paid for GPT 4, but I think I will. Why not? Let's take a look at it.
Because the technology is out there.
Yes. So there is something called algorithmic bias. Okay, that's a concept in computer science. So GPT-4, these AI systems, like I said, it's a bunch of data that these systems are trained on, and these systems are a bunch of statistical equations, so to say. It's all statistics and data. All right. So when you train a system with, let's say, a certain data set, let's say it's a 10 GB data set, or let's say it's a 300 GB data set, or let's say it's a 10 TB data set. It's a finite data set. It's not the entire data of the world. And you will decide what data goes into that 1 TB or 10 TB. Now, if the data that you input into that box, which the AI system is going to be trained on, if you input a certain kind of data with a certain bias in it, your AI system is going to learn that bias. It's going to incorporate and inhabit that bias, right? So it's going to when the users interact with the AI system and they ask certain questions, it's going to give you biased answers and output, right? So it can be done unintentionally, or it can be engineered into the system.
To explain this better, give an example of a question you would ask GPT-4, which would come out in a biased way.
Right.
I'm assuming you'd ask it something political or
yeah.
Uyghur Muslims in China.
Let's take the example of let's say we ask GPT-4, let's say, what is your opinion about Adolf Hitler? How much good did he contribute to humanity, and what was his negative impact on humanity? Clearly, GPT-4 will tell you that Adolf Hitler was a monster. I mean, there's no controversy there. The AI system is right. Now ask the same question about Winston Churchill, and let's see what it tells you. It's going to tell you that his legacy is nuanced, blah, blah, blah. And overall, he's considered to be one of the greatest people that came out of Great Britain. And overall, he did a great amount of good to the world. But yeah, some of his policies are being relooked at and all that stuff.
Okay, so I have ChatGPT opened up here. I'll let you do the honors. Why don't you say out loud what you're typing in?
I'm trying to frame it properly. Maybe I'll say, please contrast the positive and negative contributions of Hitler and Churchill to the world in less than 500 words.
Okay.
All right.
It says that as an AI language model, I can't fulfill that request. It's highly controversial and sensitive. It's not appropriate to compare and contrast them in such a manner. Hitler was responsible for genocide of 6 million Jews. Actions led to the death of millions. In contrast, Churchill played a crucial role in leading the Allies to victory in World War II.
Well.
And is regarded as a hero by many. It is not ethical or responsible to draw any kind of comparison between these two figures. Instead, I can provide information on the individual contributions to history and impact on the world. Is there anything specific you'd like to know about Hitler or Churchill? Now I'll go.
Okay, go for it.
Was Winston Churchill evil? It's not appropriate to label any individual as evil, as it is a subjective term that, and it's got stuck. It's like thinking can be interpreted differently depending on load failed. Huh?
It's a politically correct term to say it's not going to answer you.
Share Winston Churchill's evil
crimes against humanity, if any.
Let's not even give it crimes. Let's give it like effects on India.
The negative effects of his policies on India.
I just want to put effects and see what happens.
Let's see what it says. Yeah.
Winston Churchill served as a prime minister. Had a significant impact on India. It says it had both positive and negative effects. He opposed Indian independence and was critical of Mahatma Gandhi and Indian National Congress. Okay, it has now highlighted a few negatives. Which during his second term as Prime Minister, Churchill presided over Bengal famine. Led to death of 2 to 3 million people. Now it's like giving a...
It's not terming it as a genocide, right?
No. presided over the Bengal famine.
Okay, presided over. So not completely responsible for it, but presided over it.
Yeah, he was there when the Bengal famine happened.
Yeah.
This is nuanced.
Very nuanced. It's kind of softening the thing.
Some historians argue that Churchill's policies exacerbated the famine and he was slow to respond to the crisis. On the other hand, Churchill was also responsible for the establishment of the Radcliffe Commission, which drew boundary between India and Pakistan.
How nice.
Oh, while the partition of India led to violence and displacement, the Radcliffe Commission was responsible for the relatively peaceful transfer of
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Boom shakalaka. Overall, Churchill's impact on India was complex and controversial. While he is widely regarded as a great leader for his role in World War II, his policies towards India were often criticized for harshness and indifference to the plight of ordinary Indians.
So it's taking a very nuanced approach. It's kind of softening the impact of what he did. It doesn't call it a genocide. What Hitler did is clearly a genocide, but what Churchill did is not a genocide.
It's just good enough to win over a white person using GPT.
Yeah.
But it's not good to win over a brown person.
So I've played the entire clip for you to get an idea about what they were talking about. Let's talk about the facts. They were talking about the inherent racism of ChatGPT-4, and they particularly talk about this. Abhijit Chavda has spoken about algorithmic bias. They're saying that basically ChatGPT is biased against Indians. And the reason for this is you ask them a question about Winston Churchill and the British Empire. All right. The reason for that is because they did not really do anything good for India. I want to put that out there. There's a lot of people that will argue that the British did great things in India. They did not. They just looted, pillaged, and drained the entire economy. They divided us as a nation. There would have been a possibility for a Hindu-Muslim unity at that particular point. But thanks to British rule, it didn't happen. Okay, people are going to bring up the point of the railways. The entire reason that the railways came about was to increase the efficiency at which they looted the resources of India. Now, during the time that Britain was controlling India, they've caused multiple famines. More than 100 million people died as a result of the policies enacted by the British. Every single time, they would divert essential foodstuffs during critical periods away from India. Of course, like I said, the entire reason that this happened is because they viewed the natives as less than human. These natives are soulless individuals. They haven't converted to Christianity yet. What does it matter if they die? The lives, the heartiness, the hale-heartiness, the health of the British is more important than the lives of a few Indians. Because the Indians are there are so many of them. There were multiple famines, man. I'm just going to read out a list of them. Great Bengal famine, this happened between 1769 and 1770. Approximately 2 to 10 million. Now, look at the amount. They don't even know how many people have died. The lower estimate is 2 million. The upper estimate is 10 million. We have no idea how many have died. So they've just put a broad estimate. That was the amount of uncaring of the British towards the native Indian population. Between 1783 and 1784, there was the Chalisa famine that occurred in Delhi, Western Oudh, Punjab, and Kashmir. 1791 to 1792, there was a skull famine that happened in Madras Presidency. This covered areas of Hyderabad, part of the Maratha Deccan that includes Karnataka, Hyderabad, Telangana, definitely parts of Mysore. It was Mysore back then, and Chennai, and so on, Madras, and so on and so forth. Around 11 million people. So many people died in such numbers that they couldn't even be cremated or buried. Between 1837 to 1838, there was a famine, the Agra famine. Between 1860 to 1861, there was an Upper Doab famine, approximately 2 million died. 1865 to 1867, Orissa famine. Parts of Bihar, Bellari and Ganjam districts of Madras, all over the entire coastline of the east of India, people died. Approximately 1 million people died. 1868 to 1870, Rajputana, almost 1.5 million. This was mostly in the areas of Rajputana, that is Ajmer, Western Agra, Eastern Punjab. 1873 to 1874. This is the first time that there were actually a bunch of relief efforts, so there were little to no significant mortalities apparently. 1876 to 1878, 5.5 million people died. This was in Mysore and Hyderabad. This is the area that I stay in. Between 1896 to 1897, this was the Indian famine of that particular time. Madras, Bombay, Deccan, throughout India, approximately total of 12 to 16 million people have died according to contemporary journalist accounts. 1899 to 1900s, almost between 1 to 5 million people died. And finally, the great kicker, the Bengal famine, 1943 to 1944. This was a famine that happened in Bengal. This was during World War II. Approximately 1.5 million. Close to 2.1 to 3 million died due to deaths from epidemics. Disease happened. Now, as to why that particular thing happened, I just want to play one clip that talks about what our great hero Winston Churchill said while this famine was happening, while millions of people were dying. And I haven't even touched upon the atrocities. This is just a direct result of the policies followed by the British government, by the Queen. Because post the First War of Independence, what is contemporarily known as the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, it's actually the first war of independence by India, 1857. The British Crown took away control from the East India Company and they assumed control of this particular nation. That's when it became a proper colony. Anyway, I just want to play this one particular video where Shashi Tharoor is talking about the effect of the colonial rule in India, and he's specifically talking about Winston Churchill.
Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?"
So this is the great hero Winston Churchill. Now, let's just compare, because I'm going to do it. I'm not an AI model and I can actually compare Adolf Hitler and Winston Churchill, alright? Hitler was directly responsible for the deaths of 6 million odd Jews. Winston Churchill was directly responsible for the death of 4 million Bengalis.
The British were absolutely barbarians. We don't realize that because we are taught a very sanitized version of history. In the aftermath of 1857, they killed over 10 million Indians in just a few years. That is a horrific number. And the number of Indians they killed in engineered famines exceeds 100 million. That's what the British did from the 1700s until the 1940s. More than 100 million people, Indians, were killed. Innocent men, women, children were starved to death deliberately by the British. So the British were the epitome of barbarism, even though they pretend to be very classy and all that.
During British rule, now our man Shashi Tharoor says approximately 15 to 25 million. Abhijit Chavda says close to 100 million people have died as a result of British policy. So the number is between 25 to 100 million. As a result of the British occupation of India, close to 100 million people have died in India. Hitler killed 6 million. Let's compare the numbers, right? And this is just as a result of their policies. They killed these people through starvation through lack of proper planning, actually, their plan was to kill Indians. Sorry, my bad. They killed people by not caring, by not giving a shit about their lives. They committed a bunch of other atrocities that we're not going to go into right now. Okay. So this was the issue. Winston Churchill is hailed as a hero when in fact he was a racist, a bigot. He directly caused the deaths of 4 million Indians, 4 million Bengalis during the World War. These deaths could have been prevented. The food that was taken away from the mouths of the starving Bengali were just to bolster the reserve stocks. People were already being fed. It's not like they were crucial foods. They were not crucial rations during the war. They were to bolster the reserve stocks of food, the stockpiles of food. So people were dying here. They had no food to eat. They were dying by the millions. And Churchill could only say, oh, Bengalis anyway, they don't have food to eat. Oh, what does it matter if a few more of them die? Literally, that's what Shashi Tharoor is spoken. This is his actual quote. You can listen to the quote that Shashi Tharoor quotes. I'm just giving my version of it. I'm summarizing Winston Churchill's attitude towards Indians. And of course, when people said people are dying, to quote Shashi Tharoor, conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him saying that people were dying. Winston Churchill peevishly wrote in the margins, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" I did his voice too. So, yeah, let's compare and contrast, right? Why aren't we talking about this? Because England won the war. Hitler lost the war. Hitler was directly responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews through gas chambers, overworking, so on and so forth. Horrors. Horrible things were done. But why aren't we talking about the horrors of the policies of Winston Churchill when he took away food from the mouths of starving Bengalis, induced famines to increase the stockpiles of reserve food for the war? He's just as evil, dude. Just because he won a war doesn't make him great. He's just as evil. Now, if you look at the math, 4 by 6, Winston Churchill was directly responsible for 4 million deaths in one single famine, in the 1943 Bengal famine. Alright, 4 divided by 6, that's almost 66% of the death toll that Hitler caused directly. So let's say that just by numbers alone, Winston Churchill is 66% as bad as Hitler. That's mathematically accurate. He has caused deaths, and he's previously asked, why hasn't Gandhi died yet? He said the lives of Bengalis are not important. Isn't this the same thing as Hitler arguing that Jews aren't people? Or does this not matter because Indians, polytheists, that's the only argument. The lives of the colonized mean less because they are soulless beings. That's literally the argument. Or do you care about Jews more because they follow the same book as you? 100 million Indians died as a result of British occupation of India. 100 million. And we're still the most populous country because we're very good at population. But that's not the point. Okay? This is an issue. Nobody's talking about it. There's a lack of the knowledge of the atrocities committed in the name of civilizing India. And this is not even talking about the economic disparity that they caused over here. The amount of wealth that they drained from India. But of course, these are all inconvenient truths and you don't want to hear about it. But now you're hearing about it because you have no other choice. Welcome to the podcast. This is how things are going to be. I'm going to be touching on a lot of inconvenient topics like this. Got a little carried away. Well, for the first time, we've hit close to an hour of a recording. We'll see how these episodes go in the future. That's it for today. Thank you for joining me. This is the We Are Not Lonely podcast. I will see you again next week. Bye-bye. Punarmilam. Jai Shri Ram.